Welcome to the Radical Abundance Podcast, where we celebrate God's radical abundance in all things. For the entire month of October, we are talking about God's radical abundance of purpose in our life. This is episode 5 of Radical Abundance, and I'm your host, Teresa Janzen. Today's guest is Brenda Haire. She is a purpose, process, and publishing coach and the author of Save the Butter Tubs. She's also co-authored a Bible study with her daughter that is just about to come out. So let's talk about realizing whose you are to find who you are and learn all about this new upcoming Bible study. Welcome to Radical Abundance. I'm your host, Teresa Janzen, and today's guest is Brenda Haire, and she is the author of Save the Butter Tubs, Discover Your Worth in a Disposable World. Welcome, Brenda.
Hi, glad to be here, Teresa. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to hear more about your ministry, your book, your upcoming book. But first, I have to ask you, I heard that this book, Save the Butter Tubs, took you 15 years to write. I just have to ask, how did that happen?
Sure. Well, it's actually the story's in the book, but I'll share a bit of it here too. I do get that question as an author a lot. How long did it take you to write the book? The story is a little backstory and along. So I felt called to write in 2003, set out on the journey with God and said, okay, what is this? Where are you leading me? And he gave me a couple great book titles and some great content. I took it to a Christian publishing conference and was told, you have great book titles, but you're a nobody. So come back when you're a somebody and we'll be happy to speak with you further. Mind you, this was a Christian book conference. So I was like, what? What does that even mean? Who says that to someone? And so what it really meant was were looking to publish people with a platform. And at the time, Facebook didn't even exist. There wasn't really a huge place to put a platform other than if you had a website. I think MySpace was a thing back then, but only teenagers were really using it. So it was like, what does this mean? So I really started diving into kind of the marketing aspect of publishing and what that meant. And should I self-publish? How should I go about this? And then as the enemy tends to do, he started to creep in different ways. And I started to creatively avoid my writing and my calling ultimately, and felt like, who am I to write this book? Who's going to listen? And all of these kind of things. And so I creatively avoided writing, and I went back to school and thought, well, if I take some journalism classes, that'll help me kind of figure out some more writing, right? And in the process of that, I wrote some articles that were published in a newspaper, sent them home to my grandmother, who read the newspaper religiously. And a visit a couple of weeks later said, I woke up in the middle of the night and God gave me a revelation that you're to write a book about all the good in my life. And then she handed me a notebook, said, here, I've already started. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something to this. And so the more I started unraveling her story, the more I realized it tied directly into my story of not knowing my own worth, not understanding my calling, where she was very direct and knew hers from the get-go. She knew that she was gifted as a cook, and that's how she was to love on people through her restaurant and her ministry of cooking. And so it just tied in perfectly. But it took me a while to put it all together. It was like a giant puzzle. I always laughed that it was the last puzzle that my grandmother and I ever did together, was putting her stories together with mine in the book. And so actually in the book itself, there's her writing is in italics in the book. And in the audio version of the book, my sister actually reads my grandmother's portion. So her stories are as true to possible. We tried to minimize the editing. She's since passed, so we tried to minimize the editing in her portions, but we still wanted to make it readable and enjoyable. So
there's so much of that I absolutely love. I love the multi-generational. I love that you kept her words right in there, and even having the family connection for the audiobook version. The thing that stuck out to me though about that story was the fact that you had someone say to you, you're a nobody, and your book is about worth, about finding your worth and your value. I mean, that seems kind of, is that ironic? I don't know.
Well, the original two books that I submitted were not this book. So this book really kind of created itself, I guess, out of the desire of my grandmother's heart to, have me write about the good in her life and the struggles that I had dealt with up to that point of writing. And so it really came from the title was God given. I was sitting in her living room looking across her kitchen at her stack of butter tubs on the counter and thought, that's got to be the title of this book. I don't know how it all fits together. And then a couple of years later, I was at a conference and I was like, what does this title have to do with this? How does this all fit together? And God clearly spoke to me and said, you're the butter tub that she saved. And it's really the metaphor of seeing the value in things that other people discard. And so just like that publisher, was trying to discard me as a nobody, somebody else saw the value in that. And it's been life-changing writing the book, and all the things that have come since then. It's just really been life-changing. So right now, my deepest passion is for people to know their worth and act accordingly. And that's actually part of the subtitle for the Bible study that's coming out in the fall that we'll have that's directly tied into the book. So very excited about that coming out. And I actually co-wrote that with my daughter. So again, keeping that family tie in.
Wow. It sounds like family is really important to you and central to your life. And you draw a lot of inspiration from family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we're a blended family. I came from a broken home and unfortunately repeated that in my own life. But we have a beautifully blended family. We have 3 grown children now and 3 grandchildren and another on the way. So I'm very excited about our growing family. And it's an interesting blend when you put all those people in one place.
It sure is. I also have a blended family, and I always talk to people and say, blended, that sounds so nice, doesn't it? But have you ever seen what happens inside of a blender? That can be messy. And it is messy at times, but you blend it, and then ultimately you get a smoothie, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we are very blessed. Our siblings our children have never considered themselves steps. They're all just siblings. And so they treat each other as such and love each other, even though they're all 6 to 7 years apart. So it's really interesting, the dynamic there and how well they all get along. And we've got some great family rivalries and things that we do. We play a lot of board games together, and we have trophies and things like that. I talk about that in the book as well, because I talk more about creating moments than gathering things and having a bunch of excess, and that our worth doesn't come from that, but it really is who we are and the character we show up with every day. And so I believe that translates into every part of our life, including how we act in our families. So it's real important for us. We do that a lot. The older your kids get, it makes it a little easier, right, to create experiences rather than having to buy things, because they can buy for themselves at that point. So it makes it a little easier, but I encourage people to start at a young age for sure.
Right. Well, one of the things that really drew me to you and your ministry and your book is the idea of purpose. And this whole month on Radical Abundance, we've been talking about God's radical abundance of purpose for our life. And, so often I see people who, just really struggle to find purpose. And as you and I talked, I know that you specifically focus on helping women find their purpose. Why is it that you think women seem to really struggle with purpose?
That's a great question. I was just talking about this with my daughter-in-law over the weekend. I think it's because the way that the world has shifted, we're torn between, are we supposed to work outside the home? Are we supposed to work inside the home? Are our kids our purpose? Is some great big, I think people are looking for this title that they think is their purpose. And I think women just struggle more because of the culture that we are here in America, especially, of where do I belong? Should I work outside the home? Am I supposed to be the high heels suit wearing, chasing this American dream, if you will? Or am I supposed to be home, barefoot and pregnant, if you will? And it's these stereotypes. And it's like, neither. Don't be either. Choose the path that God laid out before you. And I think that's where people really get confused when they're seeking the Lord in it. They're looking for that one thing, that one purpose, and they're confused as to what that really is. And so I always like to tell people that the purpose begins with what you were created for, which is to be in a relationship with Christ. If you can nail that down, all the other will come, and he will show you exactly what steps he wants you to take and how your unique giftedness plays out in what he's asking you to do.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes when we're in the midst of those family years, if you are a woman who has had children and married, then you can draw your identity oftentimes gets connected to your husband. In fact, the church has been one that oftentimes tells us the job of the woman is to be a helper to her husband. And that can be a real challenge when you really feel like God has a ministry for you in particular. Do you see women who struggle with that idea still in the modern church today?
I do. In fact, we moved from San Antonio, Texas, population, I think about 3 million, to a small town population our town is 2,000. We live outside of a town of 100,000. So small town. And it was like going back 20 years in time when we moved here. And we wanted a church that was similar to our home church, which was actually a mega church in San Antonio. So it's kind of funny that we were, but we ended up in a church of about 150 people. And the style was similar. So I didn't realize at first that it was actually a Baptist church. And a lot of their doctrine at the time was still women aren't to speak from the stage, women aren't to lead classes. And I came from on staff at that mega church. I was on staff in a ministry position. And so it was very hard for me to take a step back and say, oh, all right, they're about 20 years behind us here. And where are we going to lead them to? So when they first, the church has completely changed now. It's been 13 years. But when we first got there, they wouldn't even let me lead a Bible study unless it was for women only. And they were looking to do home groups, which is very popular now in the culture. They were looking to do home groups. And they asked if my husband and I would lead one. And my husband said, well, I won't, but she will. And, that's her gift. She will. And he's got a fear of public speaking. So he's like, I'm not teaching or leading anything. And they wouldn't put it out there as my home group or my Bible study. They listed it as a couples thing, even though I was the one doing, all the work behind the scenes and then leading it ultimately. So it was really interesting that was probably 12 years ago, 13, 12 years ago. And to hear them say those kind of things. And then ultimately, the church has changed quite a bit. We got a new pastor about 3 years ago. And I was one of the first women to ever deliver a message on a Sunday morning. The first opportunity I had was actually around the book. My pastor interviewed me around the book. And then later, I did a Sunday message about humility. So it was really an honor to be one of the first women kind of breaking that cycle in the church.
Yeah, I've had that opportunity also to be the first woman to deliver a message from the pulpit. And that's an interesting situation. In my case, they actually had a man standing by. They didn't tell me this. They had a man standing by on the front row, sitting on the front row, just in case it was needed for someone to intervene. I don't know. It was, wow. I kind of wish they hadn't even told me that afterwards, but they did tell me afterwards that that's what that guy on the front row was for. I thought, wow. And when we moved here to South Sudan, I remember the very first week we were here, this very large church of about 1,200 people, they came and asked my husband to deliver the message that Sunday. And he said, really, you want my wife? And he referred them to me, and they were fine with that. So I was really, I didn't know what to expect in this culture. And they just came and they said, well, you speak on Sunday. And I was very happy to do that for them. So yeah, we can easily tie our purpose to our spouse, but then also if you are a woman who has had children, tie your purpose to your children, eventually those kids grow up and leave the home. And where does that leave you? Do you find women really struggling there?
Absolutely. Especially those who have maybe even homeschooled their children, that were really those kind of hands-on parents. My husband, he calls me a helicopter mom, which I don't ever consider. I don't consider myself that. I was very involved with my kids' activities and there for all of their events, but I don't think I was a helicopter mom by any means. But yeah, when that ends, it's very hard for some women to figure out what's next. And I think that for women, that's kind of where their midlife crisis, if you will, comes in, because they're like, oh, now what am I supposed to do? And hopefully they actually are friends with their spouse and actually like that person so that they can continue in a happy marriage. Because a lot of times I've seen where they're like, I don't want to be here. I don't like him. I only liked the kids. And now what do I do? And so that's really kind of terrifying when you get to that place. So it's important for women to realize not only who they are in Christ as a mother, as a wife, and what their purpose is moving forward. But really, we were talking about culture shifts, but how the culture shapes us is really so important, because if you let the culture shape you and then all of a sudden you don't feel like the pretty princess that you were told you were, as a child, that culture does that, right? Oh, you're so pretty. You look like a princess. We tell little girls that all the time. And then they grow up and they don't feel like that anymore. They can really go through that identity crisis. And so there's so many things coming at us that are telling us who we should be, that it's just so important for people to really realize whose they are, and then they'll realize who they are.
Exactly. I've even said that before. So thank you. Wow. Thank you so much, Brenda. Now, I know that you work with women on finding their purpose, but you also work with men. Tell me how that is different.
Oh, well, it is very different. Men, what's funny is that I've noticed is that you have to tell them things a few different times, a few different ways for them to own it. And sometimes they'll own it as their own thought, even if it wasn't their thought. Like when they absorb it finally, they feel like it was theirs. And so it's a little humbling to have to sit back and go, well, I'm glad you finally got it. I'm pretty sure I told you that 4 times. Yeah, that kind of thing. Which is, I think it's just men, the way they process differently than women. It's a lot more logical thinking versus emotional thinking in a lot of men. They're looking for tangible ways to move the needle, if you will. Whereas women, they're really connected to how that makes them feel and what their purpose is behind that and that type of thing. So it is a different shift, but I do really enjoy working with men, especially in their, helping them process through their books, their businesses. I'm a strategy specialist, if you will. I really thrive on helping people break down processes and how to simplify those things in their businesses and even in their books, outlining a book and helping them break that down, setting up the reader's journey through the book, if you will. I love that type of thing. And I find that for some reason, men seem to need that a lot more, or maybe that they're open to it because they think systematically. So that seems to help them. Whereas women think more emotionally. And so they're more about, well, how is that going to make people feel? And I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings and those type of things. Whereas men are more, let's move ahead and get straight to the point. So I have a military background. I was in the Air Force early on in my career. And so that helped a lot working with men. That was pretty much all I worked with at the time in my unit. And so I have a diverse background. And so that really plays into it. I love working with CEOs and executives and really helping them kind of lay things out for their company and set some real good systems in places so that it smooths the process for them and simplifies it. It should be more about fun and less about work. Work is biblical, but work should also be enjoyable.
And I think one of the things that makes work enjoyable is when you really feel that it is part of who you are, or that's not the right way to say it, but it's fulfilling that purpose. When the calling and the work and everything comes together, I think it was just last night. It seems like it was longer ago, but last night I had a really productive day. I had done so much. And at the end of the day, I was absolutely exhausted and completely fulfilled. And that's where that work becomes fulfilling rather than draining and rather than drudgery, is when you really feel this is what God has made me for. And
Absolutely.
The purpose God has put me here for. Yeah. And whether you're Absolutely. A man or a woman, you said with men, you're a process coach, and with women, you're a purpose coach.
Yeah, I do both with Youre. It's a matter of crossover, right? So it's what they're coming to me for. And a lot of times it's the first step is the purpose, right? So for women, it's what should I do? What is my purpose? And then once we kind of flesh that out, and it's exactly what you're saying, Teresa, about when you're acting and living in your unique created giftedness, that's when you're so fulfilled. That's when you feel most connected to Christ, when you're like, this is what I was made for. And I think that's what really people are looking for when they think of their purpose. That's what they're really, this is it. This is what I was made for. And when you can figure out that, then I can take them to the next step of, okay, how do we create a process for this, for either you to live this out as a ministry, to you to live this out as a career, then we go to the next step. And then depending on if they're interested in publishing a book or their message warrants that, then we can go to the publishing side of it as well. But I think it's important for people to be able to articulate their message so that they can clearly, when people are like, what do you do? I don't really know what I do. It's like, that doesn't make anybody feel good. But when you can clearly articulate, I'm a purpose, process, and publishing coach. I help people simplify their messages. When you can clearly articulate it, I think it makes people feel more confident about who they are and who they were created to be. I just really want to simplify things for people. And that's a unique giftedness that I have. So I'm happy to live out that.
Well, I know it sounds simple, but from my own experience on going through this process, simplifying can be really complicated. And it really does help to have someone there to walk alongside you. And a coach is great for that. And so if people are interested in learning more about purpose or process coaching, how can they best get in touch with you?
Sure. They can either go to my website at brendahaire.com, and my last name is Haire. So brendahaire.com, or they can email me. My email is speaktome, all spelled out, at brendahaire.com. So speaktome at brendahaire.com.
And you're also a speaker, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And what type of events do you usually speak at?
Yes, I love to do workshops and retreats where it's more in depth and people are actually working on the material and processing through. I really like to see those kind of light bulb moments with people and help them process through things. So workshops and retreats are fantastic, but a good keynote, I'm all about that as well. I can see the light bulbs going off from the stage, even if the people aren't necessarily communicating that back with me. Every now and then you'll see somebody do that, like, oh yes, you'll see it physically. They'll move their hand or something like that. But I love helping people understand their purpose. And when that light bulb goes off, it's an amazing feeling.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. So the new book that's coming out is a Bible study that is
Correct.
Based on the book. But do I need to have the Save the Butter Tubs before I get the Bible study?
You don't. It is written as a standalone. It does reference back to the book every now and then, but it is written as a standalone. It's a 15-week Bible study. So it's great for kind of a semester if you're in the Americans kind of semester program that most churches are in. It's a 15-week. You can do a intro at the beginning or a celebration at the end, and everything you need is in there. So if you're leading the Bible study, you can lead it just using the book itself. And if you're wanting to do it as a group, everything's in there. There's some tips at the back as well about, just good practices for leading a group. One of the things that I really love doing is when you have a larger group, how do you incorporate prayer requests? If you have a large group of 20 people, you could spend the whole evening just doing prayer requests, which there's nothing wrong with that if that's your intention on being there. But if you're trying to get through a book study, you've got to, at some point, limit the requests or change how you receive them. And so there's a good tip in there about how to do that. And it's been well received. We've been doing it in our home group for over a decade, and I've seen other home groups pick it up as well. So it's really been fantastic. But yeah, you don't have to have the two. There's quotes from Save the Butter Tubs in there, and there's some references to it, but it is absolutely a standalone if people don't want to read the book, or you can do the audio of Save the Butter Tubs and then grab the Bible study as well. So any combination, or if you just want to dive into the Bible study, dive right in. It's there for you.
And who's the intended audience for both books, really?
It's really women. I would say ages. My youngest reader of Save the Butter Tubs was 15. After she read the book, she said she wanted to be my best friend, which was very flattering coming from a 15-year-old. But my oldest was 96. So it's a wide range, which, in marketing, they say narrow down. But it's really for people who are looking for their reason. What am I here for? And what does God have for me? And why are all these lies getting in the way? So it can be, I write it, especially Save the Butter Tubs was written for a general audience of both men and women. And I share stories that would, apply to both. But the Bible study itself is more geared towards women. It's my daughter and I writing it, and it's really geared more towards women. But again, it could probably apply pretty easily across the board. We don't go into too much, how to be a wife or anything like that isn't in there. So it wouldn't be too much focus on women. But that's kind of where our heart is. So my daughter's 21. And so anywhere from that range, on up is a good place to be. She's got a heart for teenagers, and she really wants to do some stuff with the Bible study with her teenagers. She's a teacher for middle school. And so she's really got a heart for that. And former missionary, which I also write about in the book. So she was a missionary with an organization close to where we live for a while. And so it's a wide range, but it's really people looking for that. So it could be midlife crisis people, people who are really looking for a pivot. Maybe they're about to retire and they're like, what do I do next? It could be those empty nesters, like you were talking earlier. Now my kids are gone. What am I supposed to do? Why am I even here? I thought it was for these kids, and now they're gone and grown and they don't even call me. It could be that kind of person. So it also will help people. And I'm got a book coming. I don't have a date yet for it, but I'm working on a book about worth in the workplace. And it's really, that'll help people who are working in a job, maybe that they don't necessarily feel is their unique place to be, but that they need the job to survive, and how they survive through that. So it's really, my goal is really to help people understand their deep, true worth and where that comes from, and how, no matter the situation they're put in, what that means for them. I mean, when we think of Paul and how he wrote so many great books of the Bible from prison, it really, it doesn't matter your circumstances. It just matters how you see yourself and your purpose. So.
Yeah, I love that, because, not everybody gets to work a job that is, like I'm a missionary, and, I'm living the dream, so to speak, in my world at least. But if you're doing some other job that you don't feel is that calling type of a job, finding your purpose in that, I think is essential, really. And you know what? It's absolutely there. That's what's the exciting thing is God designs purpose in absolutely everything. We're all designed to have a purpose. So that's why I talk about God's radical abundance of purpose. It's not reserved only for people in ministry or anything like that. It's for everyone. So coming back to where we started at the beginning, when we were talking about multi-generational things, I'm really curious as to how working with your daughter, did that bring about any different insight or perspective in the Bible study than you would have had you just worked on it by yourself?
Absolutely. So first of all, working with a co-writer or co-author really helps you stay focused. That accountability is there. So just that alone was great, knowing that she was counting on me. This is her first book. So that was great. But in the Bible study perspective, she shared some things in there that I wasn't expecting her to share, and some healing things. And it was really, I was just doing the editing of it a couple of weeks ago and read through the entire thing from start to finish. And some of her, we skipped, one chapter was hers, one was mine. We kind of jumped around different, but each chapter was one of us. And some of hers, I just thought, wow, she has really stepped into her own as an author and as a storyteller. And it's interesting that at the same time period, she was working on doing some social media management for a company, and had shifted into middle school teaching. And so and for English teaching of all things, she's an English teacher all of a sudden. And so it's like, that's crazy that you went from not, because, I kind of had to convince her to become an author. It's like, I think you should help me do this. I need you to help me. I had written about 8 chapters. So I'm like, I need you to help me finish this and focus on this. And so she was a little hesitant, and she shares a little bit about that in the book, but she was a little hesitant. And then once she got through it, it's just amazing to see what God's done with her, and done through that. So from a mom's perspective, it's, such a blessing. It brings tears, to think that she's a changed person because she went through it, and just to see what God's done with it. But she's an incredible young lady. She graduated early. She's one of those really smart people that could do anything that they want to do and set their mind to. And so it's just fascinating to see her kind of plugging into what God's calling her to right now in this moment. And I'm excited that it's this Bible study and what's to come of it. We're planning out the launch party and the book tour and those kind of things. And so it's fun to dream with her and talk about those different opportunities that are coming. And I look forward to standing on the stage next to her. And I've seen her on stage before. She's seen me on stage before. So it'll be great to, be on stage together and be sharing that with her. So I'm looking forward to it.
That does sound amazing. And I love having a little bit of the behind the scenes on both of these books. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And in the show notes, I'll have links for people to be able to connect with your website, find out more information, hear about when that book launch happens. And so they'll be ready for that new Bible study coming out. So as we wrap up here, Brenda, do you have just some final words, a takeaway for us today?
Yes, I really believe that knowing your worth changes everything. So if you haven't heard that by now, knowing your worth changes everything. So it'll change how you show up every day, how you feel when you wake up, how you show up at your job, how you show up in your family. And so I just want people to really spend some time in thinking about who they are in Christ and where their value really comes from. And it'll change everything for them.
It will change everything. Thank you so much. And Brenda, have a radically abundant day.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.